Thank you very much for coming, and let me begin by thanking the Portuguese government and, in particular, the city and people of Lisbon for hosting us so warmly. I have been to quite a few summits over the past years, and the organization of this one is indeed world class. And here you have NATO's roadmap for the next 10 years. Our new strategic concept has just been adopted by the heads of state and government. It's really an historic moment. NATO is an unparalleled community of freedom, peace, security, and shared values. But the world is changing. We face new threats and new challenges, and this strategic concept will ensure that NATO remains as effective as ever in defending our peace, our security, and our prosperity. Of course, the new strategic concept reconfirms the commitment by NATO members to defend one another against attack, and that will never change. But it also modernizes the way NATO does defense in the 21st century. And we will, in the coming years, invest in key capabilities to address the new threats of the 21st century. NATO will enhance its role in counterinsurgency operations and in stabilization and reconstruction missions. We will develop a standing capability to train local security forces, and we will create, for the first time, an appropriate but modest civilian capability within NATO to better interface with our international partners. These are all lessons from our operation in Afghanistan. The strategic concept shows we have learned them. And we will offer our partners around the globe more dialogue and more cooperation with NATO than ever before, because our partnerships are proving to make a clear, concrete contribution to international peace and security. That is a success we will reinforce, in particular with Russia. The strategic concept commits NATO to the goal of creating the conditions for a world without nuclear weapons, but confirms that as long as there are nuclear weapons in the world, NATO must remain a nuclear alliance. That is a balance that makes sense. It commits allies to a goal they all share, and we will work towards it, but all allies agree that NATO's business is defense, and in a nuclear world, that must include deterrence. The strategic concept keeps the door to membership in NATO firmly open to European democracies that so wish and that meet our standards, because the past decade or so is vivid proof that enlargement has helped spread peace, democracy, and prosperity across this continent. The strategic concept makes continuous reform part of how we will do business every day, because our taxpayers deserve the most security for the money they invest in defense. And let me conclude with one final point. This strategic concept is not simply a statement of principles, nor a compendium of aspirations. This is an action plan which sets out clearly the concrete steps NATO will take. Starting today, or well, maybe tomorrow, this action plan will be implemented, and it will put in place an alliance that is more effective, more engaged, and more efficient than ever before. And now I'm ready to take your questions.
Good evening, Secretary General. Laurent Thomé from Agence France Presse. You say that the strategic concept draws from lessons you learned from Afghanistan, but does the strategic concept come maybe 9 years too late?
Actually, it's never too late to learn lessons. I really think it's the right approach to implement the lessons we have learned, and what we have learned in Afghanistan, and by the way also in the Balkans, during our operations in the Balkans. The lesson we have learned is that there is rarely a military solution solely to problems. We need a more comprehensive approach where military operations go hand in hand with reinforced civilian reconstruction and development. Let me stress, NATO has no ambition to take the lead role in civilian reconstruction and development, but we will improve our ability to interact with civilian actors like the United Nations, the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. That's the key message in the new strategic concept.
Yes, Secretary General, are you concerned by the possibility that the START treaty may be, that the ratification of the START treaty may be delayed in the U.S. Senate because of the latest changes after the midterm elections?
Let me be very clear on this. The new START treaty will contribute to an improvement of security in Europe, and I would say in the whole Euro-Atlantic area. And I would strongly regret if the ratification of the START treaty is delayed. A delay of the ratification of the START treaty would be damaging to security in Europe. So I strongly encourage all parties involved to do their utmost to ensure an early ratification of the START treaty.
Mr. Secretary General, Elise Labott from CNN. Your vision enshrined in this strategic document for NATO to move outside the European space more often and combat these threats on the global stage. I'm wondering if you're concerned that more than half of the members at this point are cutting their defense budgets right now. And I know that although you say that now people can pool more military expenses, I'm wondering if you're concerned that the alliance will have the capabilities, the investments that it needs to grow into this new global role. Thank you.
Obviously, it is a matter of concern, but I also think we have a very clear and positive response to the economic challenge. And the clear answer to that is to pool resources together, to cooperate, to prioritize. And that's the key message in this new strategic concept. I would encourage allies to embark on strengthened cooperation with a view to making more efficient use of resources. The recent bilateral agreement between the UK and France is an excellent example of how allies can pool resources and make more efficient use of the money they invest in defense. We could also think of multinational solutions where a number of allies pool resources together to acquire capabilities they couldn't afford individually. And finally, I could also envisage a strengthening of common funding within NATO, all with a view to make more efficient use of resources. And finally, we should also prioritize, and that's exactly what we will do at this summit, we will agree on a list of 10 critical capabilities to which we will give priority in our defense investments in the coming years. So I feel confident that despite budget cuts, despite budgetary constraints, NATO allies and NATO as such will live up to commitments in the coming years.
Secretary General, Amir Oren of Haaretz in Israel. In the Secretary Albright document, which preceded this one, the simmering tensions in the Arab-Israeli conflict and the danger of Iranian policies were explicitly mentioned. In superficially leafing through this document, which you just put out, they seem to be absent. What is your position, both on Iran and on the Middle East conflict?
First, on the Middle East conflict, NATO as an organization is not engaged in the Middle East peace process. Obviously, allies, individual allies are, and we follow the development closely. And of course, I'm very supportive as regards the US, the Quartet's attempts to find solutions to the Middle East conflict. Whether NATO can play a role in the future, I don't know. If at a certain stage there is a peace agreement, I think there will also be a need for an international military presence to supervise and implement this peace agreement. Whether NATO can play a role in that respect, I don't know. That will very much depend on the concrete circumstances. First of all, there must be a peace deal to protect. Secondly, the parties involved should request international assistance. And finally, the UN should mandate such an operation. And I think it's a bit premature to guess about that. As regards threats, external threats, the fact is that more than 30 countries in the world have or are acquiring missile technologies. Some of them can even hit targets in the Euro-Atlantic area. And we intend to build a missile defense system to protect against any of these threats.
Deborah Haynes from The Times. Have the NATO members agreed on the missile defense shield? And if not, why not? And is there going to be an agreement this evening? You
will see that missile defense is mentioned in the strategic concept, and it has a very prominent place. But we are going to discuss missile defense in more details during our dinner tonight.
Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Secretary General, looking ahead to tomorrow on Afghanistan, there's been a lot of talk in recent days about the end of 2014 handover. Do you think it's realistic to adhere to that end of 2014 timetable, or should leaders be more flexible in allowing for more time? And if I could impose upon you to repeat an answer in French as well for our listeners.
I find it realistic to fulfill the goal of handing over lead responsibility for the security to the Afghan security forces all over Afghanistan by the end of 2014. It's an ambition outlined by President Karzai. We endorse that ambition, which means that tomorrow we will announce that the transition process is about to start at the beginning of 2011, and I find it realistic that this process will be completed by the end of 2014. But let me stress that I foresee presence of international troops also after 2014, but not in a combat role, in a more supportive role, including training and education of Afghan security forces.